Doug Green, and I'm the publisher of Telecom Reseller, and this is a special podcast for the Cloud Communications Alliance and TR Publications. And we have with us today Katia Gonzales, who's the head of fraud and security and analytics at BICS. Katia, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Doug, for having me here. It's really a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm really excited about this podcast. You know, we have done lots of content over the last few years about STIRSHAKEN. We've talked about it, we've anticipated it, we've analyzed it, we've heard a lot of experts discuss it. We're now actually observing some of the milestones in STIRSHAKEN, and this morning, here on this podcast, we're about to hear something different. We're going to hear maybe where the limitations of STIRSHAKEN are and possibly some thoughtful alternatives that maybe sit beyond the STIRSHAKEN regime. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. But Katia, first of all, what is BICS?
BICS is a communication provider. So we are enabling the international telecommunications from any party, any enterprise, any operator, actually anybody or any party that requires international communications of any kind. We can facilitate and help them, make them reality.
So, STIRSHAKEN anticipated, now being implemented. Some people say it's pretty good. Some people say it's a little disappointing. But you have a fresh take on it. You're saying it has some things that are lacking. I think that's what you're saying.
Yes. So I think that the spirit of STIRSHAKEN was correct. So at some point we realized that the robocalls often carry a manipulated calling number to, misguide the end users and have them answer the call to get the information that the bad guys will be trying to get from them. Now, the problem is that many of these robocalls were originated in US, but many others were and are still originated outside of US. And that's, the regulation that FCC issued and that required STIR and SHAKEN to be implemented by the carriers forgets how all the complexity of this international telecommunications environment where you have many intermediate parties and where, it becomes difficult, if not impossible, actually, to oblige international or foreign carriers to sign for a CLI according to STIRSHAKEN protocols as per FCC. A Chinese company, why should they apply FCC regulations? They're not going to do it. And no, Zimbabwe, and I'm just in random examples, but like any company, any carrier from outside US has no obligation to implement STIRSHAKEN. And what happens is that then we're going to get all these calls reach US with no authentication on the CLI. And then the first party in US will have to check and sign for that CLI. I'm not saying authenticating because that party cannot authenticate, can just confirm that they have gotten a CLI, that they will not manipulate it, and that they will sign it with an attestation level C, most probably. And so what happens is that call entering US in that way, it has not been manipulated since it entered US, but nobody knows what happened before that. And then probably the CLI has been manipulated upstream, several hops upstream. So what is the objective of having a CLI verified with an attestation level C I'm not sure I see the value in that. So the problem is that we forget that the manipulation happens far upstream in most cases, and that those parties are never going to sign a call.
What is the FCC missing? It sounds like you feel that the FCC has a blind spot in its thought process about STIRSHAKEN, maybe also its thought process about the larger issue of just simply restricting robocalls.
I think the main problem is that the pure signature of a CLI does not mean that that call is not a robocall. You may see, and there are, again, several stats that are published on internet. You may see that calls with a CLI with attestation level A are rarely robocalls, but the calls that carry a CLI attested level B or C, there's a huge portion of these that are still robocalls. So what I think we are missing is all that international angle, and I'm just talking about the international scene because this is what I know. The rest I let it for the US carriers. But on the international landscape, what we miss out is this notion of ecosystem and the fact that there are different intermediate carriers and that very rarely a call goes just from network originating party to network terminating party. There are always intermediaries. And well, it's very difficult to just work with analytics. It's a very powerful tool, but we have already seen at BICS, for example, robocalls where you only have one call over 6 months from that specific CLI. Then it's impossible. There's no analytics that will show you one single call. And when talking to my carrier fellow members at the i3 forum, we hear the same. So analytics is a very good tool. It has its limits. We cannot only utilize that because then we're going to be blocking legitimate calls for which we have no safe harbor. So we enter into a very complex situation where if we block too much, we enter in contract breach with our partners sending traffic. If we block too little, then we have issues because we will be letting robocalls pass. And this is not something that we want. So analytics is a very good tool. We have seen at BICS that it has very good effects. And that helps us also spot which are the partners that we don't want to be doing business with anymore. And we have stopped some relations thanks to that. And we have seen the robocall ratio decrease. But again, it's something that has to be used in combination with other tools. But to come back to your original question on what is probably FCC missing, I think it's this international angle. And the complexity of the ecosystem internationally.
Now, part of that complexity, when we talked about this just before our podcast, is the networks that overseas countries sometimes have are diverse and also may include technologies which have more or less cycled out here in the U.S. For example, you mentioned some places may still be using 2G.
Yes. And that is, again, one of the, so STIRSHAKEN is easily, and I'm quoting the easily implementable in SIP networks, but there's so much TDM in US, but abroad, there are regions that are mainly TDM. And, the strength of signing CLIs as per STIRSHAKEN is on the volume. So you need the whole community to do it, to play the game. But as soon as you have one of these intermediary parties that don't play the game, that doesn't pass on the zip headers with the verified CLI, as soon as you have a chunk of the path that is TDM, then you lose that attestation level on the CLI. And then, well, then there's no point in it anymore. And then you'll get again into US border. You will have again to sign. I mean, the first carrier in US will have to again sign the CLI with attestation level C, and then poof, you get back to square one because attestation level C is not very meaningful in that sense. Actually, there are actually some, which are the calls that generate outside of US and that carry a US CLI? There are not so many. There are the ones from roamers, very difficult to spot if you don't get the traffic directly from the network operator. Let's say you are in France, you make a call back home. So the French operator will be sending, let's say, the call to a carrier and then to another carrier, and then it will get, to your family in US. But okay, so these are very legitimate calls that do not have to be blocked and that will rarely have a weird pattern. But then you have also businesses, call centers. There is vast traffic that is originated outside of US and that will carry a US CLI. Are these businesses not legitimate? But yeah, they are. Sometimes the business is, I've heard recently of a situation where people complained of robocalls, but actually it was not robocall. It was, these were calls from credit recovery. So, a business was trying to reach out people who owe money to enterprises, and they were trying to get that money. So it's not pleasant calls. Nobody likes to get these calls. Probably this company trying to get money back was a little bit insisting, but it's legitimate activity. So what do you do with these kind of situations? Analytics is going to show it probably as abnormal behavior or robocall behavior, because a few US numbers will be calling many different subscribers in US repetitively. So it's very, very difficult to only base yourself on the analytics, although it's a good tool.
So, you're hinting here that there's something that maybe we can do apart from just telling the FCC to maybe have a wider vision. Are there things that carriers, communication service providers, and maybe cloud communications companies inside the CCA, are there things we can do to help our customers?
Yeah, I think there are some simple tools that can help. So one of them, and I'm a big fan of the ITG, the traceback that has been also set by FCC and the UST. It's a very powerful tool. So the goal of this traceback is to try, once you create a ticket for a robocall, is to try and find the reverse path of that call to the origin of the call. And I think it can be quite powerful because then you can put the penalties on the right party, not on the intermediate parties. The goal here is to find who the bad guys are, who is generating these robocalls, and make sure we can take the necessary actions to stop that. I believe that with a little bit of regulatory coordination, it could work. So, and I'm talking about this regulatory coordination because not all regulations, not all legislations in all countries worldwide allow for a party to share who was sending a number of calls or a portion of traffic. This is not always allowed. So it requires that, FCC get some kind of agreement with or that at some point the regulations evolve in such a way that this sharing of information is possible. Because that is also one of the difficulties that we have in this industry is that we all have different regulations, different legislations, and that sometimes they are not really properly tuned and coordinated. When you buy something on Amazon, you can very easily say how unhappy you are about the product and the vendor, but here in the telecom space, it's very difficult to share information about how unhappy you can be with a party. So I think we need to evolve in that space to make this trace back even more effective than it is already now. So this is something that can be extended and I think is very powerful. The second thing is that I think it could be, it could be quite easily achieved for all parties globally to understand which are the numbers that are allowed to call from abroad into US. So the different carriers in US know when they allocate a number to a company that will work from abroad and that will be utilizing the US numbers in the range to call back to US. So US CLI to US terminating number. If we knew which are these numbers that are allowed to do this, well, it would be terribly easy to then spot the, or it will be easier to spot the abnormal activity because then you would have only this list of numbers that are allowed for enterprises and the roamers. That's it. So I'm not sure how much of an effort it is, but I think it can be probably a more humble effort than implementing STIRSHAKEN. Yeah.
So it sounds like there's actually things that CCA people and other listeners can actually do now, even while we're waiting for FCC to try to implement STIRSHAKEN and maybe other measures.
Yes, and I think that the international. So I'm chairing the i3 forum. The i3 forum is a grouping of international carriers, and I'm chairing there the fraud group. And within this group, I mean, you realize that most tier 1 and even tier 2 carriers want to be careful about robocalls and fraud in general, but robocalls specifically. It doesn't bring real financial benefit. US termination is very cheap. So these kind of calls are not legitimate. They use your capacity. They, cause trouble to end users. So you don't want this kind of trouble. You don't want this kind of traffic either. So we are all taking a lot of measures. And I think, as we discussed just before the call, it's in the interest actually of the whole ecosystem to build a more trustful ecosystem that we can keep on relying on phone calls, on SMSs to do our business, to talk to our family, to have our normal lives. So it's in the interest of everybody to take measures that are reasonable in terms of cost benefit, to make this ecosystem trustable and to have a long-lasting business altogether. So I think raising the ethics in the different businesses is extremely important. We all have our share in this. We all need to take action. It doesn't make sense that I let go any traffic that gets to my switch, well, then it causes trouble to my customers, because in the end that relation will not last. So I think most parties are ready to invest in this, but as I say, it's the ratio cost benefit that has to be make sense.
So, as we close up our podcast today, it seems to me that, we've been talking mostly about the U.S. and the FCC, but there must be another regime of standards coming in the European Union, perhaps in the United Kingdom, and of course in some of the other major economies such as India and so on. And it doesn't sound like there's a lot of harmonization between these different regimes.
Indeed, and that is another element that adds complexity to the whole ecosystem of the telecoms. There are indeed initiatives here in Europe, UK, France, Belgium working on it, Germany, because we do also have an issue on robocalls, not as much as in US. And we have a big issue on SMS also. We have problems with the spam calls in general, not only robocalls. So we do have issues. And then, same as in US, regulators are taking action, want to try and force or move, create a dynamic that helps operators find solutions. But indeed, I mean, as international communication providers, we're in the middle. The regulations from each of these countries is different. The regulation from US is again different, and we need to find, as an ecosystem, a way to make them coexist and work together. There has to be interoperability. If not, we're going to have a way of working in each country, and it doesn't make sense, because that helps create loopholes in the middle, and that's this is what is always exploited by the bad guys. So we need to create that cohesion. It's difficult, but if not through regulation, we need to find, as an industry, a way to make everything work together, or else we're not going to make it happen.
So Katia, I really want to thank you today for giving us some fresh perspective on STIRSHAKEN and also the wider issue of robocalling, and giving us some practical ideas also about things we can do now. I know we're going to continue to have this conversation, but where can we learn more about BICS and also BICS's point of view on this issue?
Yes, you can reach out to our webpage, www.bics.com. We have, again, I'm chairing the i3 Forum Fraud work stream, so you can also go and check the works we have done, what we have published at the i3forum.org. There are a number of blogs and articles that I have also published. I think they are all available at bics.com. And well, I hope we can all find a solution together, and that we're not going to be talking about this still in a couple of years. So yeah, let's hope we can all find a way ahead.
Well, Katia, again, thank you very much indeed for joining me today.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks a lot.